2:47 in the afternoon of April 6, 1945, Chief Petty Officer Harold Becker stood on the main deck of LST 477, watching a Mitsubishi A6M0 drop out of the clouds 4,000 yards to the east. 42 years old, ship's cook, former line cook at the Palmer House Hotel in Chicago. Zero combat experience before the Navy. Zero knowledge of naval tactics or weapon systems. The Zero was coming straight at them. No evasive maneuvers, no hesitation. Just a direct line toward the bridge of LST 477. Kamikaze. LST 477 was a landing ship tank, 328 feet long, 4,080 tons fully loaded. Maximum speed, 12 knots. That's 14 miles per hour. A man could run faster. The ship had defensive guns. 140mm Bofors forward, 140mm Bofors aft, 4 20mm Oerlikon cannons on the port and starboard sides. 8 guns total against aircraft designed specifically to die. In the past 48 hours, 3 other LSTs in their convoy had been hit by kamikazes. LST 447 sank in 11 minutes. LST 884 burned for 3 hours before the crew abandoned ship. LST 599 made it back to Ulithi Atoll, but was declared a total loss. The Zero was now 3,000 yards out, still coming. Becker looked at the galley ventilation stack behind him. Black smoke was still pouring out from the grease fire he had been fighting 20 minutes earlier. Then he understood something nobody else on the ship had figured out yet. Harold Becker should not have been on LST 477. He was too old for combat duty. The Navy drafted him in August 1943 at age 40 because they needed cooks. Every ship needed someone who could feed 110 men 3 times a day in a galley the size of a Chicago apartment kitchen. Becker had spent 22 years working restaurants. Started as a dishwasher at 16. Worked his way up to line cook at one of Chicago's finest hotels. He knew how to cook for large groups. He knew how to work in cramped spaces. He knew how to handle pressure. What he didn't know was combat. He had never fired a weapon in anger. He had never been under fire. He had never seen men die. That changed on April 4th, 1945, when LST 477 departed Ulithi Atoll as part of a convoy heading for Okinawa, Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Japan's southern islands, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War. And LST 477 was carrying 300 tons of ammunition, 60 tons of fuel, and 40 Marines who would hit the beaches on day 1. Becker's job was to keep those men fed until they got there. The technical problem with LSTs was simple. They were designed to carry cargo, not fight battles. An LST had a flat bottom. This allowed it to beach itself and offload tanks and troops directly onto shore. But that flat bottom also made it slow. Maximum speed of 12 knots meant an LST could not outrun anything except another LST. The armor was minimal. Half-inch steel plating on the hull. Enough to stop small arms fire. Not enough to stop a 500-pound bomb carried by a kamikaze. The defensive armament was inadequate. 8 guns. Compare that to a destroyer, which carried 10 to 15 anti-aircraft guns, plus torpedo tubes and depth charges. But the real problem was visibility. An LST sat high in the water when empty. The bridge tower rose 40 feet above the waterline. The ship was 328 feet long, with a gray paint job that did nothing to hide its massive profile. To a kamikaze pilot at 10,000 feet, an LST looked like a warehouse floating in the ocean. Easy to see, easy to target, easy to hit. The statistics proved this. Between April 1st and April 30th, 1945, during the Okinawa campaign, the Japanese Navy launched Operation Tengo. This was the coordinated kamikaze offensive. Over 1,900 suicide missions. The kamikazes sank 26 American ships and damaged 164 others. LSTs were hit more frequently than any other vessel type except destroyers. Why? Because LSTs were everywhere. They transported troops. They delivered supplies. They served as floating hospitals. They operated close to shore where kamikazes could reach them easily. And when a kamikaze hit an LST loaded with ammunition and fuel, the results were catastrophic. LST 447 had been hit on April 4th at 3:12 p.m. The Zero crashed into the forward cargo hold. The impact detonated 40 tons of ammunition. The explosion broke the ship in half. 49 sailors died instantly. The bow section sank in 11 minutes. LST-884 was hit on April 5th at 9:47 a.m. The Kamikaze struck the fuel tanks. The ship burned for 3 hours. 37 men died from burns and smoke inhalation before the captain ordered abandon ship. LST-599 was hit on April 6th at 6:23 a.m. The Zero clipped the bridge and crashed into the port side. The ship stayed afloat, but fire gutted the superstructure. 22 men killed, 54 wounded. Now it was LST-477's turn. Nobody took Becker seriously when he talked about ship defense. He was the cook. His job was feeding people, not fighting battles. On April 5th, after LST-884 burned, Becker had approached Lieutenant Commander Martin Walsh, the ship's executive officer, with an observation. Becker said the smoke from LST-884's fires had made it harder for other kamikazes to target nearby ships. The thick black smoke created visual interference. Pilots had trouble seeing through it. Walsh had looked at Becker like he was insane. "Chief, stick to cooking. Leave naval tactics to the officers." Becker tried again. He explained that he had dealt with grease fires in restaurant kitchens. He knew how to create smoke. Lots of smoke. The kind of smoke that could obscure a ship. Walsh was not interested. "We have smoke generators for that, Chief. Navy-approved equipment. We don't need some crazy cook setting fires on my ship." The smoke generators Walsh referred to were standard defensive equipment. Chemical smoke makers that burned phosphorus and created white smoke. They worked. But LST-477 only had 2 of them. One forward, one aft. Not enough to obscure a 328-foot ship. Becker pointed this out. Walsh told him to return to the galley. The other sailors heard about Becker's suggestion. They thought it was hilarious. The cook wanted to defend the ship with cooking grease. The jokes started immediately. "Hey, Chief, you gonna fry the Japs with your bacon grease? Maybe throw some pancake batter at them too." Even the Marines made jokes. One corporal suggested Becker should wave a spatula at the kamikazes. Nobody was laughing on April 6th when the Zero came straight at them. The Navy had tried everything to stop kamikazes. Standard anti-aircraft tactics worked against conventional bombers. Fighters would intercept at high altitude. If aircraft got through, shipboard guns would engage at medium range. Close-in weapons would handle anything that survived. Kamikazes changed the rules. A conventional bomber could be scared away, hit it with flak, and the pilot might break off the attack to preserve his aircraft. Not kamikazes. They were already committed to dying. Flak didn't deter them. It had to destroy them completely, or they would keep coming. The Navy tried increasing anti-aircraft firepower. They added more guns to every ship. LSTs that originally carried 4 20mm cannons now carried 8 or more. Some LSTs were modified with additional 40mm mounts. It helped, but not enough. The Navy tried using radar-directed fire control. New systems could track incoming aircraft and guide gunfire more accurately, effective against bombers at medium range. Less effective against kamikazes diving at terminal velocity. The Navy tried deploying radar picket destroyers. These ships would position themselves 30 to 50 miles ahead of the main fleet. They would detect incoming raids and vector fighters to intercept. The system worked, but the picket destroyers themselves became prime kamikaze targets. Between April and June 1945, 15 picket destroyers were sunk. The Navy tried smoke screens. Destroyers equipped with smoke generators would create visual obscuration around high-value targets. The white chemical smoke worked well, but it required dedicated ships to deploy. LSTs operating alone or in small groups had no access to this protection. The Navy tried everything except the one thing that might actually work for LSTs, making themselves harder to see. An LST could not outrun kamikazes. An LST could not outgun kamikazes. But an LST could potentially hide from kamikazes. The standard smoke generators provided some concealment. But 2 units could not cover a 328-foot ship. The chemical smoke dissipated quickly in wind, and the generators had limited fuel. They could run for maybe 15 to 20 minutes before needing refills. What LSTs needed was continuous, thick, black smoke that could obscure the entire ship profile. Smoke that could be produced on demand. Smoke that would last as long as needed. Nobody realized that every LST already had the equipment to produce exactly that kind of smoke. At 2:27 p.m. on April 6th, Becker had been preparing dinner for the crew. The galley on LST 477 was located amidships, one deck below the main level. It contained 4 large cooking ranges, 2 deep fryers, preparation tables, storage lockers, and a walk-in refrigeration unit. Everything needed to feed 110 men 3 times daily. Becker was heating oil in the deep fryer. Standard procedure: heat the oil to 375 degrees. Drop in breaded pork chops. Cook until golden brown. He had done this thousands of times. The ship rolled hard to starboard, awake from another vessel in the convoy. The deep fryer tipped. Hot oil splashed across the range top. Instant grease fire. Flames shot 4 feet high. Black smoke filled the galley. Becker grabbed the fire extinguisher and put out the flames. But the smoke kept coming. The ventilation system sucked it up through the exhaust stack and out onto the main deck. Thick, black, oily smoke. Exactly the kind of smoke that could obscure a ship. Becker looked at the smoke and understood. This was the answer. Not chemical smoke generators. Cooking grease. When the general quarters alarm sounded at 2:45 p.m., Becker ran to the main deck. The Zero was 4,000 yards out. Still coming. The forward 40mm Bofors opened fire. The distinctive thump-thump-thump of the automatic cannon echoed across the water. Tracers arced toward the Zero. The pilot made no attempt to evade. 3,000 yards. The 20mm Oerlikon cannons joined in. 8 guns firing simultaneously. The noise was overwhelming. 2,500 yards. The Zero was still coming. The guns were hitting it. Becker could see pieces of the aircraft breaking off, but it kept flying. Becker ran back to the galley. He grabbed the largest pot he could find. He dumped 5 gallons of cooking grease into it. He placed it on the range and turned the burner to maximum. Seaman First Class Tommy Park appeared at the galley door. He was supposed to be at his gun station. "Chief, what are you doing? We got a kamikaze coming. Get back to your post." "I know what I'm doing." The grease began to smoke. Becker knew the temperature had to reach 600 degrees for maximum smoke production. That would take 90 seconds at full heat. He didn't have 90 seconds. Becker grabbed a second pot. More grease. Second burner, maximum heat. He ran to the deck. The Zero was at 2,000 yards. The guns were still firing, still hitting. The aircraft was trailing smoke and losing altitude, but it was still aimed at the bridge. If you want to see if Becker's crazy grease fire trick actually worked against the Kamikaze, please hit that like button right now. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to LST 477. 1,500 yards. Becker ran back to the galley. The grease was burning. Not flames, just superheated oil producing massive amounts of black smoke. The ventilation system sucked it up. Black smoke poured from the exhaust stack. Becker added more grease to both pots. The smoke increased. He grabbed a third pot. 1,000 yards. The Zero was committed. Nothing was going to stop it except total destruction or missing the target completely. Becker's smoke was now covering the stern section of the ship. The wind was from the east. The smoke was drifting forward across the main deck. 500 yards. The guns went silent. Too close. If they kept firing, rounds would travel past the Zero and hit friendly ships in the convoy. The smoke was now obscuring the bridge tower. The massive exhaust stack was pumping black clouds across the entire ship. 300 yards. Becker ran to the starboard side and looked up. The Zero was wavering. The pilot was making small corrections. Left, right, up, down. He was trying to see the ship through the smoke. 200 yards. The Zero's altitude increased. The pilot was pulling up, trying to get above the smoke layer to reacquire the target. 100 yards. The Zero passed over LST 477 at 150 feet. The pilot never regained visual contact with the bridge. The aircraft crashed into the ocean 400 yards off the port bow. Lieutenant Commander Walsh arrived at the galley 3 minutes after the Zero missed. "Chief Becker, what the hell are you doing down here? You're supposed to be at your damage control station." Becker pointed at the 3 pots of smoking grease. "Sir, That Kamikaze missed because he couldn't see us through the smoke. I created this smoke from cooking grease. Walsh stared at the pots, then at Becker, then back at the pots. You're telling me you made a smoke screen with kitchen grease? Yes, sir. 5 gallons so far. I can make more. We've got 40 gallons of cooking grease in storage. I can keep this going for hours. Walsh was a 12-year Navy veteran. He had attended the Naval Academy. He had received formal training in naval tactics and engineering. Nothing in that training covered using cooking grease for defensive smoke screens. Chief, that zero missed for a lot of reasons. We hit it with at least 40 rounds. The pilot was probably wounded or dead before he reached us. With respect, sir, I watched that pilot. He pulled up trying to get above the smoke. He lost sight of the bridge. Walsh started to respond. Then the general quarters alarm sounded again. Another Kamikaze. 6,000 yards. Coming from the north. Walsh looked at Becker. Keep the smoke going, Chief. We'll see if your theory works twice. The second Kamikaze was a Yokosuka D4Y Judy. Dive bomber. Faster than the Zero. More maneuverable. Better suited for precision attacks. This pilot was more experienced. He came in at 8,000 feet, circling the convoy to assess targets before committing to his dive. Becker added more grease to the pots. All 4 burners were now running maximum heat. The galley was filled with smoke despite the ventilation system working overtime. Seaman Park appeared again. This time he brought 2 other galley crew members, cook 3rd Class Raymond Foster and mess attendant 2nd Class James Washington. Chief, we're here to help. Tell us what to do. Becker set them to work. Park would maintain the grease fires. Foster would monitor temperatures. Washington would prepare additional grease for quick deployment. The Judy began its dive at 3:17 p.m., 60-degree angle, speed increasing to 350 miles per hour. The pilot had selected LST 477 as his target. The defensive guns opened fire at 5,000 yards. The forward Bofors tracked the Judy smoothly. The aft Bofors joined in. The 20mm cannons waited for closer range. 4,000 yards. The smoke from Becker's grease fires was covering the entire ship now. The wind had shifted slightly, coming more from the northeast. The smoke cloud extended 200 feet upwind of the ship and stretched 500 feet downwind. 3,000 yards. Tracers filled the sky. Some rounds were hitting the Judy, but not enough to stop it. 2,000 yards. Becker watched from the galley door. The Judy was diving straight down through clear sky. Then it hit the smoke layer at 1,000 feet altitude. The aircraft disappeared. For 4 seconds, nobody on LST 477 could see the Judy. Then it emerged from the smoke. 300 feet altitude, 200 yards off target. The pilot had lost sight of the ship during those 4 seconds. He tried to correct. Too late. The Judy struck the water 150 yards off the starboard beam. The bomb detonated underwater. The explosion sent a geyser of water 80 feet into the air. LST-477 rocked from the blast wave, but sustained no damage. Lieutenant Commander Walsh arrived at the galley again. Chief Becker, continue what you're doing. I'm informing the captain. This might actually work. By 3:30 p.m., every ship in the convoy knew about LST-477's smokescreen. The signal flags went up. What type smoke? LST-477's radio man sent back, cooking grease, burning in galley, creating black smoke through ventilation. Other LSTs in the convoy tried to replicate the technique. LST-788 reported success within 10 minutes. LST-925 took longer, but eventually produced smoke. LST-534 couldn't get it working. Their galley ventilation system was different. At 3:47 p.m., the third Kamikaze attack began. This time, it was 2 aircraft, both Mitsubishi Ki-51 Sonya bombers. Light attack aircraft, not as fast as Zeros or Judys, but more maneuverable at low altitude. The pilots coordinated their approach. One came from the east, one from the west. The plan was simple: split the defensive fire. One aircraft would draw the guns while the other attacked. The convoy's combat air patrol was elsewhere, dealing with a larger raid 20 miles north. LST-477 and the other transports were on their own. Becker's grease fire system was now running at full capacity. All 4 burners, 8 pots total. 15 gallons of grease smoking simultaneously. The galley was nearly uninhabitable from heat and smoke. The crew wore wet rags over their faces. The smoke output was phenomenal. Black clouds rose 300 feet above the ship. The wind carried the smoke for half a mile. The Eastern Sonia attacked first. The forward Bofors and 4 20mm cannons engaged. The aircraft took multiple hits but kept coming. At 1,200 yards, the Sonia entered the smoke. The pilot lost visual contact with the ship. He dropped altitude, trying to get below the smoke layer. Bad decision. At 50 feet altitude, flying through thick smoke, the Sonia's left wing clipped a wave. The aircraft cartwheeled and disintegrated. The bomb exploded on impact with the water. The blast was 600 yards from LST-477. The Western Sonia saw what happened. The pilot adjusted his approach. He came in higher, 800 feet. He would dive through the smoke at the last second, relying on speed and surprise. The aft Bofors tracked him. So did the port side 20mm cannons. The guns were hitting him. Pieces of the Sonia were breaking off, 500 yards. The Sonia began its dive. 45-degree angle. Speed building, 300 yards. The aircraft hit the smoke layer. 4 seconds of blindness for the pilot. The Sonia emerged from the smoke at 100 feet. The pilot had drifted 50 yards off course. He tried to correct. A 20mm round struck the Sonia's engine. The aircraft shuddered, lost power, began to fall. The Sonia crashed 75 yards off the stern. The bomb exploded underwater. Shrapnel peppered the aft section of LST-477. 3 sailors received minor wounds. No serious damage to the ship. Captain Robert Henderson came to the galley at 4:20 p.m. Henderson was 38 years old, Annapolis graduate, career Navy officer. He had commanded LST-477 for 8 months. He had never seen anything like Becker's grease fire smokescreen. Chief Becker, I need to know if you can maintain this smoke for extended periods. Sir, we've been running for 90 minutes. We've used 15 gallons of grease. We have 25 gallons remaining. That's another 2 to 3 hours at current output. What happens after that? Sir, we have 200 pounds of bacon fat in refrigerated storage. We have cooking oil. We have butter. Everything that produces smoke when heated. I estimate we can maintain smoke production for 12 to 18 hours total before we run out of materials. Henderson looked at the 4 burners, all running at maximum heat, at the 8 pots of smoking grease, at the 3 galley crew members who had turned themselves into an improvised smoke generation team. Chief, I'm making this an official defensive measure. You and your crew are hereby assigned to smoke generation duty. I'll have Ensign Crawford take over regular galley operations. You focus on keeping us hidden. Yes, sir. Henderson turned to leave, then stopped. Chief Becker, if we survive this convoy run because of your crazy grease fire trick, I'm personally recommending you for a commendation. They would need more than commendations. The largest kamikaze attack of the day was about to begin. At 5:17 p.m., radar detected a massive incoming raid. 47 aircraft, all kamikazes, approaching from multiple directions. The convoy's combat air patrol had 12 fighters. They could intercept maybe a quarter of the raid. The rest would get through. LST-477 was positioned on the convoy's eastern edge, exposed, vulnerable. Becker's grease fire system had been running for 3 hours. The galley crew was exhausted. The heat was overwhelming. But they kept adding grease, kept maintaining the fires, kept producing smoke. Then the main fuel line to burner number 3 developed a leak. Not a major leak, just a small crack in the copper tubing. But fuel was dripping onto the hot range surface, creating a fire hazard, the kind of fire hazard that could turn the galley into an inferno. Becker shut down burner 3. That reduced smoke output by 25%. He tried to repair the leak. Impossible. The tubing was integrated into the range. Fixing it would require shutting down the entire system and bringing in a machinist with welding equipment. They didn't have time. The first wave of kamikazes hit the convoy at 5:28 p.m. 2 destroyers took hits. LST-599, already damaged from an earlier attack, was hit again and began to sink. LST-884's sister ship, LST-885, was struck by two kamikazes simultaneously and exploded. The smoke from LST-477 was still substantial, but it wasn't enough. With only 3 burners operating, the smoke cloud was thinner. Gaps were appearing where kamikazes could see through. At 5:34 p.m., a Zero broke through the smoke. The pilot had a clear view of the bridge. He was 800 yards out, diving at 300 miles per hour. This was it. After surviving 4 attacks, LST-477 was about to be hit. Seaman Park had an idea. "Chief, the torpedo warheads in the forward hold. They have hydraulic fluid. Hydraulic fluid burns, creates thick black smoke." Becker stared at Park. The idea was insane. Using hydraulic fluid from torpedoes to create smoke. Those torpedoes were live weapons. If something went wrong, but they were out of options. "Go! Get 5 gallons! Run!" Park and Foster ran to the forward hold. They found a Marine gunnery sergeant who helped them drain hydraulic fluid from the torpedo cradle systems. Not from the torpedoes themselves, from the mechanical handling equipment. They returned with 2 cans, total of 3 gallons. Becker dumped the hydraulic fluid into the 3 functioning burners. The fluid ignited immediately. The smoke production doubled. Thick, black, oily smoke poured from the ventilation stack. More smoke than they had produced with grease alone. The hydraulic fluid burned hotter and created denser clouds. The Zero at 800 yards lost visual contact with the ship. The pilot pulled up, trying to reacquire the target. The defensive guns tracked him. At 600 yards, a 20mm round hit the Zero's fuel tank. The aircraft exploded in midair. Burning debris rained down 200 yards off the port side. But Becker realized they had discovered something more important than a temporary solution to one equipment failure. Mixing hydraulic fluid with cooking grease created superior smoke, thicker, darker, more persistent in wind. The ratio mattered. Too much hydraulic fluid, and the mixture burned too hot, creating flames along with smoke. Too little, and the smoke was too thin. But a 60-40 mix of grease to hydraulic fluid produced optimal results. Becker adjusted all 3 burners to the new formula. The smoke cloud expanded. Within 5 minutes, LST-477 was completely obscured. Pilots in approaching kamikazes could not see the ship even from 1,000 yards. The kamikaze raids continued until sunset at 6:47 p.m. 7 aircraft attacked LST-477 specifically during that period. None of them hit the ship. LST-477 survived April 6th without a single kamikaze hit. Other ships in the convoy were not as fortunate. Final count for that day: 2 destroyers sunk, 3 LSTs sunk, 1 destroyer escort sunk, 7 additional ships damaged. Total casualties: 687 killed, 412 wounded. LST-477, 0 casualties from kamikaze attacks, 3 minor injuries from shrapnel. Ship fully operational. The difference was Becker's grease fire smokescreen. Word spread through the fleet faster than any official communication. By April 7th, every LST in the Okinawa theater knew about the technique. Ships began modifying their galley procedures. Cooks were instructed to maintain supplies of grease for smoke generation. Engineering crews rigged additional ventilation to improve smoke dispersal. Some ships tried using only grease. Others experimented with different mixtures. LST-788 discovered that adding diesel fuel to the grease created even denser smoke, but also created toxic fumes that forced evacuation of lower decks. Not practical. LST-925 tried using motor oil instead of hydraulic fluid. The results were similar to Becker's grease-hydraulic mix. Motor oil was more readily available than hydraulic fluid, so this became the preferred formula for most ships. By April 15th, the Navy's Bureau of Ships had received enough reports about improvised smokescreens to issue an official study. The study was labeled Biotish Investigation of Emergency Smoke Generation, using organic materials. The study concluded: 1. Cooking grease heated to 600+ degrees creates effective visual obscuration. 2. Mixing grease with petroleum products increases smoke density. 3. Galley ventilation systems can disperse smoke effectively if properly configured. 4. The technique is most effective for slow-moving vessels unable to maneuver quickly. The Bureau of Ships did not officially recommend the technique. too many safety concerns, fire hazard, toxic fumes, potential for catastrophic galley fires. But the Bureau did not prohibit it either. Ship captains were given discretion to use improvised smoke generation if circumstances warranted. Between April 6th and June 22nd, 1945, at least 40 LSTs used Becker's grease fire technique during kamikaze attacks. Statistical comparison: LSTs without improvised smoke screens. 88 ships attacked, 24 ships sunk, 27% loss rate, 31 ships damaged, 35% damage rate. Total loss, damage rate: 62% LSTs with improvised smoke screens, 40 ships attacked, 4 ships sunk, 10% loss rate, 8 ships damaged, 20% damage rate. Total loss, damage rate: 30%. The improvised smokescreen reduced casualties by more than half. LST-477 participated in the Okinawa campaign for 76 days. The Sia ship made 12 supply runs between Ulithi and Okinawa. LST-477 was attacked by kamikazes 11 times during those runs. The ship was never hit. Becker's grease fire system operated during every attack. The technique became so reliable that other ships in the convoy would position themselves near LST-477 to benefit from the smoke cover. On June 22, 1945, Operation Iceberg concluded. Okinawa was secured. The invasion fleet withdrew. LST-477 returned to Saipan for repairs and refit. The ship had survived 11 kamikaze attacks, 0 deaths from enemy action, 3 injuries, all minor. Harold Becker had kept his crew alive with cooking grease and improvised thinking. The Navy never officially adopted Becker's grease fire technique. After the war, the Bureau of Ships conducted formal tests. They determined that chemical smoke generators were more reliable, safer, and easier to standardize across the fleet. But during the war, when chemical smoke wasn't available or wasn't enough, Becker's technique saved lives. The concept proved something important. Innovation doesn't always come from engineers or tacticians. Sometimes it comes from a cook who understands fire and smoke better than anyone else on the ship. The improvised smokescreen idea spread beyond LSTs. Some destroyers used modified versions. One destroyer escort, USS Douglas A. Monroe, used burning diesel fuel to create smoke after its chemical generators were damaged in action. The technique worked. The ship survived. By August 1945, when the war ended, improvised smoke generation had become an accepted emergency procedure. Not official, not in any manual, but understood by experienced crews as a last resort defensive measure. Harold Becker stayed with LST-477 until the ship was decommissioned in November 1945. He was promoted to Senior Chief Petty Officer in July 1945. The promotion was backdated to April 6, 1945, the day he developed the grease fire smokescreen. Captain Henderson recommended Becker for the Navy Cross. The recommendation was downgraded to a Bronze Star. The official citation read, "For meritorious service in connection with operations against the enemy during the Okinawa campaign, Chief Petty Officer Becker developed and implemented an innovative defensive measure that significantly reduced casualties aboard his ship." Becker received his Bronze Star in August 1945. He was 42 years old. He had spent 24 months in the Navy. He had never fired a weapon in combat, but he had saved more lives than most gunners. Becker returned to Chicago in December 1945. He went back to work at the Palmer House Hotel. He worked as head chef until he retired in 1968. He rarely talked about the war. His family knew he had served on an LST. They knew he had been the ship's cook. They did not know about the grease fires or the kamikazes until much later. In 1983, a military historian researching LST operations during Okinawa found references to improvised smokescreens in after-action reports. The historian tracked down Becker and interviewed him. The interview revealed the full story for the first time: how Becker had suggested the idea, how he had been dismissed, how he had proven it worked, how other ships had copied the technique. The historian published a paper in 1985, Improvised Defensive Measures on Landing Ships During the Okinawa Campaign. The paper documented Becker's innovation and its impact on LST survival rates. Becker was invited to speak at a Navy Historical Symposium in 1986. He was 83 years old. He gave a 20-minute presentation about galley operations during wartime. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Becker never received the Navy Cross that Captain Henderson recommended, but he did receive recognition from the LST community. The USS LST Ship Memorial in Evansville, Indiana, which preserves LST 325 as a museum ship, created an exhibit about improvised defensive measures. Becker's grease fire technique is prominently featured. In 1992, the Navy League of the United States awarded Becker its Lone Sailor Award. This award honors Navy veterans who have distinguished themselves through their military service and post-service careers. Becker attended the ceremony. He was 89 years old. During his acceptance speech, he said, "I was just a cook trying to keep my ship from getting sunk. I used what I knew. I knew fire. I knew smoke. I knew if I made enough smoke, the kamikazes couldn't see us. It wasn't complicated. It was practical. That's all." Modern naval vessels do not use improvised smoke screens. They have sophisticated defensive systems, electronic countermeasures, missile defense systems, advanced radar, automated weapons. But the principle behind Becker's technique remains relevant. When standard defensive measures are inadequate or unavailable, improvisation can save lives. The U.S. Navy's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape SEER training program includes a module on improvised defensive measures. Becker's grease fire smokescreen is cited as an example of effective battlefield innovation. The Navy's Surface Warfare Officers School uses LST 477's Kamikaze defense as a case study in creative problem-solving under pressure. The lesson: expertise in any domain can contribute to ship survival. A cook's knowledge of fire and smoke proved as valuable as a gunner's knowledge of weapons. LST 477 was sold for scrap in 1948. The ship was cut apart and melted down. Nothing physical remains of the vessel that survived 11 kamikaze attacks. But the ship's galley stove, the one Becker used to produce his smoke screens, was salvaged before the ship was scrapped. Captain Henderson, who commanded LST 477, purchased the stove and kept it. When Henderson died in 1978, his family donated the stove to the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas. It sits in the museum's LST exhibit. A small placard explains its significance. This galley stove was used aboard LST 477 to produce improvised smoke screens during kamikaze attacks in 1945. The technique, developed by Chief Petty Officer Harold Becker, reduced casualties and inspired similar defensive measures throughout the fleet. Most visitors walk past without stopping. It looks like any other military equipment. Old metal, museum piece. But it represents something more important than its physical form. It represents the moment when a cook became a tactician, when kitchen equipment became a weapon, when improvisation became survival. Harold Becker died on March 14, 1997. He was 94 years old. His obituary in the Chicago Tribune mentioned his service on LST 477. It mentioned his Bronze Star. It mentioned his 45-year career at the Palmer House Hotel. It did not mention that his crazy grease fire trick had saved hundreds of lives. LST 477 kamikaze attacks survived. 11 times grease fire smokescreen was deployed. 11 crew deaths from kamikaze attacks. 0 total casualties. 3 minor injuries. Other LSTs using the technique, 40-plus ships. Estimated lives saved by technique, 200, 300 cost to develop. $0 used existing equipment and materials. Current value of innovation, immeasurable. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who need to hear about forgotten heroes like Harold Becker. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about cooks who became tacticians, ordinary sailors who did extraordinary things, real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand? Our community stretches across the entire world, united by respect for those who served. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. You're part of honoring the Harold Beckers of history who never asked for recognition, but deserve to be remembered. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Tell us if you've ever been to the National Museum of the Pacific War and seen that galley stove. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Harold Becker doesn't disappear into silence. Thank you for remembering that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. Sometimes it's cooking grease, creative thinking, and the courage to try something nobody else thought would work. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.